Good evening, friends. A very warm welcome to every one of you this Sunday evening meeting of the ULT. Welcome to those joining us on Skype as well. So tonight we've got a talk on the subject of our 7 divine parents. Before we let the speaker begin, we'll read chapter 7 of the Dhammapada, which are the teachings of the Buddha. Chapter 7 is entitled The Sage. He who has thrown off the fetters and freed himself in all ways, he is free from sorrow. For him there is no suffering. He has completed his journey. The thoughtful exert themselves. They do not delight in any abode. They leave their house and home as swans their lake. Those who have no possessions, who nourish themselves according to knowledge, and who realize the goal of freedom by perceiving that life is empty and transient, their path is hard to trace, like the flight of birds through the sky. He whose appetites are slain, who is indifferent to food, who has perceived the goal of freedom by realizing that life is empty and transient, his path is hard to trace, like the flight of birds through the sky. Even the gods envy him, whose senses are subdued like the horses, well tamed by the charioteer, who is free from pride and free from depravities. He who is patient like the earth, firm like Indra's bolt, like a lake free from mud, for him there is no round of births and deaths. Calm in thought, calm in speech, calm in actions, is he who has obtained freedom through true knowledge. He has become tranquil. He is full of repose. The man who is not credulous, who has severed all ties, killed all desires, for whom even occasions to act with like or dislike arise not, who knows the ever-existing uncreate, he indeed is exalted among men. Delightful is the place where arhats dwell, be it a village or a forest, be it by deep waters or by desert's edge. Delightful are the forests to the arhats. They charm not the worldly. There the passionless find delight, for they are not allured by sense life.
Friends, this talk, titled Our 7 Divine Parents, is in one sense a study in monads, rays, and planets. Some of the deepest, most profound, and most esoteric information in all of the theosophical teachings is to be found between pages 566 to 578 of the first volume of The Secret Doctrine by H.P. Blavatsky. This is a section or chapter titled On the Elements and Atoms. On page 569, HPB states, "It may be useful to show what, in the teachings of the old initiates, the monad was, and what its origin." Reading these words, the student thus begins to make himself or herself more mentally and intuitionally alert, knowing that the information and explanations which follow are bound to be of great import, since not only will it be shown what the monad is, but also where it comes from, or how it comes into being, according to the ancient science of the initiates. So she writes, the monad, a truly indivisible thing, as defined by Good, who did not give it the sense we now do, is here rendered as the Atma in conjunction with Buddhi and the higher manas. And you can see some of these terms on the board here, and on the table at the back there's also a printed version of this diagram which you can take with you if you wish. So the monad is rendered as the Atma in conjunction with Buddhi and the higher manas. This trinity is one and eternal, the latter being absorbed in the former at the termination of all conditioned and elusive life. The monad, then, can be traced through the course of its pilgrimage and its changes of transitory vehicles only from the incipient stage of the manifested universe. Now, in theosophical terminology, the term monad is capable of very broad application, for it's said that the term may apply equally to the vastest solar system or the tiniest atom. Monads are everywhere, we read. Thus the human soul is a monad, and every cell in the human body has its monad, as every cell in animal, vegetable, and even in the so-called inorganic bodies. However, when speaking specifically of the human constitution, by the monad is meant Atma Buddhi, the conjunction of the two highest principles in man. But it is necessary for the monad to become a trinity, Atma, Buddhi, Manas, in order to be able to express its divine faculties and latent potentialities, or have any direct involvement or interaction on the planes of differentiation. Atma, our seventh principle, being identical with the universal spirit, and man being one with it in his essence, what is then the monad proper, asks HPB. Atma, or Atman, is the highermost part of every being. It is the eternal, essential nature of all. It is pure, eternal spirit, our higher self, the one universal self of all. It is indivisible, impartite, unconditioned, undifferentiated, and infinite. It is the infinite. Although Atma can technically be thought of apart from Buddhi, Buddhi cannot be properly spoken of or thought of without Atma, since Atma is its origin, its source, its life, its essence. Buddhi is viewed as the vehicle of and for the light of Atma. But going into the deeper and more specific and detailed metaphysics of the esoteric philosophy, the question is posed as to what the monad actually is, to which this answer is given on page 571. It is that homogeneous spark which radiates in millions of rays from the primeval seven, of which seven further on. It is the emanating spark from the uncreated ray, a mystery. We see that the monad is a spark, a ray, which radiates from the primeval seven. As we'll soon see, this reference to the seven is very important because it's central and crucial to the understanding of so much. HPB then explains that in the esoteric and even exoteric Buddhism of the North, Adi Buddha, or Chogi Danpoi Sangye in Tibetan, the one unknown, without beginning or end, identical with Parabrahm and Ein Sof, emits a bright ray from its darkness. This is the Logos, the first, or Vajradhara, the Supreme Buddha, also called Dorje Chang. As the Lord of all mysteries, he cannot manifest, but sends into the world of manifestation his heart, the diamond heart, Vajra Sattva, or Dorje Sempa. This is the second Logos of creation, from whom emanate the 7, or in the exoteric blind, the 5, Dhyani Buddhas, called the Anupadaka, parentless. These Buddhas are the primeval monads, from the world of incorporeal being, the Arupa world, wherein the intelligences, on that plane only, have neither shape nor name in the exoteric system, but have their distinct 7 names in esoteric philosophy. Now, this may become clearer if we look at it the way it's rendered on your handout, which you'll hopefully have a copy of, and there's a link to it on Skype. So at the top we see 0, sometimes called the Eternal Zero, Adi Buddha, the Absolute, the One, Ultimate Reality, and a Buddhist synonym for the Parabrahm of Hinduism, the Ein Sof of the Kabbalah, etc. Then 1, Vajradhara, the first Logos, unmanifested Logos it's called, which is the primal radiation from the Absolute. This is referring to when the universe comes into being. The first Logos is the primal radiation from the Absolute, and remains unmanifest, but emanates Vajrasattva, the second Logos, called the semi-manifested Logos, the creative Logos, the diamond heart of Vajradhara, and from which emanate the 7 Dhyani Buddhas, the third Logos collectively, the manifested Logos, sometimes termed the 7 Logoi, or the 7 rays. To repeat, these 7 Dhyani Buddhas are the primeval monads, from the world of incorporeal being, the Arupa world. On the next page in the Secret Doctrine, page 572, we find a theogonic outline, an elucidation upon what we've just read. It says the divine, purely Adi-Buddhic monad manifests as the universal Buddhi, the Maha-Buddhi or Mahat in Hindu philosophies, the spiritual, omniscient and omnipotent root of divine intelligence, the highest Anima Mundi or the Logos. This descends like a flame, spreading from the eternal fire, immovable, without increase or decrease, ever the same to the end of the cycle of existence, and becomes universal life on the mundane plane. From this plane of conscious life shoot out like 7 fiery tongues the sons of light, the logoi of life. Then the Dhyani Buddhas of contemplation, the concrete forms of their formless fathers, the 7 sons of light, still themselves, to whom may be applied the Brahminical mystical phrase, "Thou art that, Brahm." It is from these Dhyani Buddhas that emanate their chayas, shadows, the bodhisattvas of the celestial realms, the prototypes of the super-terrestrial bodhisattvas, and of the terrestrial Buddhas, and finally of men. So for further clarity and expansion of our understanding of the various terms used, we can look at what appears next on the front of the handout. So this is more detailed elucidation than what we just read. 0, Adi Buddha, is called on page 572 the Absolute, the Pure Divine, the Eternal Fire, which manifests as, number one, Vajradhara, the first logos, the unmanifested, the highest anima mundi, the universal buddhi, the root of divine intelligence. It's likened to a flame spreading from the eternal fire, and which descends and comes into expression as Vajrasattva, the second logos, or semi-manifested logos, conscious, universal life, from which shoot out like 7 fiery tongues the 7 sons of light, which take form as the 7 dhyani Buddhas, the third logos collectively, or the manifested logos, the 7 logoi of life. It's taught in these pages that these 7 sons, here called the 7 dhyani Buddhas, are the same as the 7 mind-born sons of Brahma, the Manasaputras of Hindu mysticism, the 7 archangels of Christian tradition, the 7 gods of various old religions, and so forth. Theosophical teachings always emphasize that the esoteric doctrine is one and can be found underlying all the world's religions and mystical traditions, since it is the primeval, archaic source and fountainhead of them all. This is theosophy itself, timeless truth, the anciently universal wisdom religion. And when one knows what to look for and how to recognize it, and the writings of H.P. Blavatsky provide us with this knowledge, one can see the same teaching just about everywhere, albeit to varying degrees hidden, shrouded, and often obscured under layers of theological interpolations and sectarian distortions. Truth, as the Rig Veda famously says, is one, though the sages call it by many names. Hinduism also speaks of the 5 Tanmatras, which the Theosophical Glossary defines as the types or rudiments of the 5 elements, the subtle essence of these, devoid of all qualities and identical with the properties of the 5 basic elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, i.e. the Tanmatras are, in one of their aspects, smell, taste, touch, sight, and hearing. Here on page 572 of the first volume of The Secret Doctrine, insight is provided into what the Tanmatras really are. They're the same as the 7 dhyani Buddhas, the 7 rays. The Tanmatras, quote, are literally the type or rudiment of an element devoid of qualities, but esoterically they are the primeval noumenoi of that which becomes, in the progress of evolution, a cosmic element, in the sense given to the term in antiquity, not in that of physics. They are the logoi, the 7 emanations or rays of the logos. The 5, or rather 7, dhyani Buddhas are also called elements, with a capital E, of mankind. Both, as primordial intelligent elements, become the creators or the emanators of the monads, destined to become human in that cycle, after which they evolve themselves, or so to say expand into their own selves as bodhisattvas or brahmanas in heaven and earth, to become at last simple men. The creators of the world are born here on earth again and again, truly. The 7 noumenal universal elements are the 7 dhyani Buddhas, or, in the language of symbolical imagery, the 7 rays of the central spiritual sun. And these 7 logoi, or 7 sons of light, are the emanators of the monads that are destined to become human in that cycle. As we saw, the 7 are themselves the primeval monads, from the world of incorporeal being, the arupa world. And the monads of we human beings are sparks which radiate in millions of rays from the primeval seven. And so we can hardly talk about the monad without also talking about the seven. Continuing on the bottom of page 572, we learn that the seven sons of light are also called stars. It says, the star under which a human entity is born, says the occult teaching, will remain forever its star throughout the whole cycle of its incarnations in one manvantara. But this is not his astrological star. The latter is concerned and connected with the personality, the former with the individuality. The angel of that star, or the Dhyani Buddha, will be either the guiding or simply the presiding angel, so to say, in every new rebirth of the monad, which is part of his own essence, though his vehicle, man, may remain forever ignorant of this fact. So each human monad is born, or rather begins the whole cycle of its incarnations in one manvantara under one of the seven sons of light. It is literally part of the essence of one of these seven sons, or seven Dhyani Buddhas, or seven primordial rays, or, if one really prefers the term, seven angels. That particular one of the seven will remain forever the monad's star throughout the whole cycle. Each of the adepts, as stated on page 573, knows their respective Dhyani Buddha, their elder twin soul, and they call it Father Soul and Father Fire. Father Soul and Father Fire. Yet it is only at the last and supreme initiation that they are placed face to face with the bright image. The Logos, HPB continues, or both the unmanifested and the manifested word, is called by the Hindus Ishvara, the Lord, though the occultists give it another name. Ishvara, say the Vedantins, is the highest consciousness in nature. This highest consciousness, answer the occultists, is only a synthetic unit in the world of the manifested Logos, or on the plane of illusion, for it is the sum total of Dhyan Chohanic consciousnesses. Atma is not spirit in its final parabrahmic state. Ishvara, or Logos, is spirit, or, as occultism explains it, it is a compound unity of manifested living spirits, the parent source and nursery of all the mundane and terrestrial monads, plus their divine reflection, which emanate from and return into the Logos, each in the culmination of its time. There are 7 chief groups of such Dhyan Chohans. This is still a quote from the Secret Doctrine, which groups will be found and recognized in every religion, for they are the primeval 7 rays. Humanity, occultism teaches us, is divided into 7 distinct groups, and their subdivisions: mental, spiritual, and physical. In other words, the manifested Logos, the Logos, or one universal energy in its fully manifested state, is a synthesis, the sum total and collective aggregate of the 7 chief hierarchies of Dhyan Chohans, or celestial beings. The human monads on our earth exist in 7 distinct groups, corresponding to these 7 hierarchies, or 7 rays, or 7 Dhyani Buddhas. each of the 7 human groups also consists of its own subdivisions. This makes sense if we recall what was said just a moment ago, that each human monad is born, or rather begins, the whole cycle of its incarnations under one of the 7 sons of light. It is literally part of the essence of one of those 7 sons, or 7 Dhyani Buddhas, 7 primordial rays, 7 angels, you could call them. That particular one of the 7 will remain forever the monad's star throughout the whole cycle. And this is where the connection comes in with the 7 sacred planets, under each of which is born one of the human groups which is guided and influenced thereby. It's to be understood that the 7 sons of light, the Dhyani Buddhas, come into being long before the planets of our own particular solar system come into being. They far transcend the planets and the planetary spirits. Yet since all of manifestation is fundamentally connected as a unity, and since it all follows the 7-fold plan and pattern, their influences and energies reach this little planet of ours through the 7 sacred planets with which they are vitally connected. As we all know, there are more than 7 planets, but it's taught that there are only 7 which have a very special and direct relation with ours. These are Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, Sun, and Moon. And traditionally people have added the Sun and the Moon in order to make 7, but Theosophy maintains that those 2 are only exoteric substitutes for 2 mystery planets, which were not permitted by the initiates and adepts to be publicly referred to and identified in days of old. The Sun is not a planet, but rather is the central star of our solar system. The Moon is a dead planet, a decaying remnant, which was the previous incarnation of our planet. Theosophy says this Earth we live on now is the child, so to speak, the re-embodiment of all the energies and life that used to be active in and on the Moon when it was still an active living planet. The Moon was the exoteric substitute, astrologically, for what is described in Transactions of the Blavatsky Lodge, page 48, as a planet with a retrograde motion, sometimes visible at a certain hour of night, and apparently near the Moon. The occult influence of this planet is transmitted by the Moon. The Sun was the substitute for a transmercurial planet. In the recently published The Secret Doctrine Dialogues, we find HPB telling her students that it is the planet between Mercury and the Sun, and is one of the most sacred planets. It is closer to the Sun than Mercury is, and in Victorian times it was recognized for a while under the name of Vulcan. It may be said that each of these 7 planets serves as a form of focus through which the energies of those 7 rays reach us and our planet Earth. It is made clear that neither Neptune nor Uranus are counted amongst the 7 sacred planets. HPB comments in a footnote in volume 1, page 573, there are only 7 planets specially connected with Earth, and 12 houses, that means the zodiacal constellations, but the possible combinations of their aspects are countless. As each planet can stand to each of the others in 12 different aspects, their combinations must therefore be almost infinite, as infinite, in fact, as the spiritual, psychic, mental and physical capacities in the numberless varieties of the genus Homo, or human being, each of which varieties is born under one of the 7 planets and one of the said countless planetary combinations. Continuing with the subject of there being 7 distinct ray groups of human monads, HPB quotes the Indian Brahmin theosophist T. Subbarao from the August 1886 issue of the Theosophist as saying, "Every Buddha meets at his last initiation all the great adepts who reached Buddhahood during the preceding ages. Every class of adepts has its own bond of spiritual communion which knits them together. The only possible and effectual way of entering into such brotherhood is by bringing oneself within the influence of the spiritual light which radiates from one's own logos. I may further point out here," he says, "that such communion is only possible between persons whose souls derive their life and sustenance from the same divine ray, and that as 7 distinct rays radiate from the central spiritual sun, all adepts and Dhyan Chohans are divisible into 7 classes, each of which is guided, controlled and overshadowed by one of the 7 forms or manifestations of the divine wisdom." So one's own logos means the particular one of the 7 Dhyani Buddhas or 7 rays of which one is a ray and reflection on earth. Souls derive their life and sustenance, it was said, from one of the divine rays or primeval monads or primordial 7 elements, the 7 forms or manifestations of the divine wisdom. And because all human beings are divisible into 7 classes corresponding to these, so are all adepts and Dhyan Chohans, since they too are human beings, or have been human beings. The triads, born under the same parent planet, or rather the radiations of one and the same Dhyani Buddha, are, in all their afterlives and rebirths, sister or twin souls on this earth, says HPB on page 574. Not meaning twin souls in the popular sense of the term as used in the New Age movement, where they often degrade the matter into physical and romantic relationships. She continues, "This was known to every high initiate in every age and in every country. I and my Father are one, said Jesus, John 10:30. When he is made to say elsewhere, John 20:17, I ascend to my Father and your Father, it meant that which has just been stated. It was simply to show that the group of his disciples and followers attracted to him belonged to the same Dhyani Buddha, star or father, again of the same planetary realm and division as he did.
So we've got a question from Christina on Skype. Can the Absolute manifest in any level of existence? It is said that everything that happens in our manifested world is transitory. But can we consider that some things that we do in life, guided by concepts like compassion, effort, and justice, have their roots in the Absolute and have value for themselves without depending on anything else? And should we search and be guided only by that absolute worth in all that we do?
I don't know if I fully understood the last part about having, was it value in themselves or for themselves?
Well, let's reread that. Well, the answer, what about the first part of the question? Can the Absolute manifest in any level of existence?
Well, every and any level of existence, everything that is in existence, can be described as a manifestation or expression of the Absolute, because the Absolute is the divine principle, the source of everything. So everything that is that in its innermost essence. And as we said, everything is a monad or a unit or a point of life and energy. Every single monad that is in existence and evolution has originated from the Absolute via the universal monad, which is the first logos, and then come into being. I don't know if that's what was meant, but I would say to that the Absolute is expressed in that sense in every level of being. But of course in an extremely differentiated way. So it's true to say that the universe, the world, all of us are the Absolute, but also in the differentiated world we have to accept as well that differentiation is a temporary fact, even though it's ultimately illusion, but it's something that we have to deal with and accept, and it serves a purpose. Duality is not the ultimate reality, but it's a temporary actuality that enables us to gain experience, learn lessons, grow, deal with our karma, and so on.
Okay, so the second half of the question, we can try to summarize it. So if we're guided by concepts like compassion, effort and justice, which have roots in the Absolute, and have value for themselves without depending on anything else.
That's the bit that I didn't quite understand.
Well,
You mean that in themselves they're good, noble things?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so their goodness doesn't depend on exterior relations. I mean, they are fundamentally, they have their own integrity. So she's saying, should we be searching and guiding only by those, what has that absolute worth?
Yes, as far as I understand. We often here refer to the 7 parameters. They were mentioned also in the 5 o'clock introductory meeting today. The parameters are the virtues or perfections that are to be perpetually practiced to the point of perfection. Those are to be perpetually practiced on the Bodhisattva path. Their qualities such as charity and love immortal, harmony, patience, dispassion, effort, concentration, wisdom. It said they're all the children of compassion absolute. So those are certainly, according to Theosophy, the guiding principles and traits and attributes that should form the basis of all our actions in life. David? Yes.
If humanity is divided into 7 classes or types or castes, could we say, what is the purpose of each of these castes or types? I mean, do they each have their own specific evolutionary purpose in coming into existence? And also, is there a connection with the 7 rays of the light spectrum? Because we use the term 7 rays, don't we? So is there a connection with Kala, or the 7 rays of the light spectrum? So there are 2 parts.
Well, to answer the second part first, I would assume, based on correspondence and analogy, that the 7 rays of the prismatic spectrum, like the 7 colours of the rainbow, are an objectively visible correspondence or manifestation on a level that we can see physically of the 7 rays in the higher aspect. And if there are 7 colours of the prism, then presumably the 7 rays that we've been talking about tonight would correspond to those 7 colours. The first part, it's not said that they're castes as such. It's never implied that those belonging to one of the 7 rays are better or higher up or necessarily more evolved or advanced than the others. We may recall that in Volume 2 of the Secret Doctrine, dealing with human evolution, it says that when humanity was born on our globe, the human beings were, or their astral images were projected in 7 zones of what was then the only dry land on the planet, the North Pole, according to the Secret Doctrine, which then was a warm place and surrounded by tepid water. Humanity came into existence in 7 distinct groups simultaneously on 7 zones of that area, which are called the 7 primeval or primordial human groups, which are presumably linked with the 7 rays. Perhaps that's the coming into existence on this earth of those belonging to the 7 different rays. What the purpose isn't explained, unless it's simply for purposes of greater experience, variety in manifestation. I don't know, we can think about that.
Yeah, so there's some questions on Skype. First is from Robert. Are the astrological 12 concerned purely with the personal and temporary?
That's probably based on the quote I read that our astrological star relates to the personality, whereas this other type of so-called star with a capital S relates to the individuality. The 12 astrological or 12 signs of the zodiac don't just relate to the personal transient self, because they have a deeper occult aspect to them, as was referred to the combinations that exist between the 12 houses of the zodiac and the 7 rays. But I think the quote was referring to the fact that in general run-of-the-mill astrology, the most basic example we know of being when you look in the newspaper or magazine at your star sign in your weekly horoscope, that type of astrology is dealing with the personal self. It's very personality oriented. It may be of some value and legitimacy at times, but it seems to be low-level astrology. That's the only type of answer I could give.
Yeah, so we've got some more questions coming in. Arthur would like to ask one on the origin of the monad. Yeah, go ahead, Arthur.
Yes, you said that the star and which are an entity, i.e. the monad is born.
Sorry, could you repeat that, please? It's a bit quiet here.
Okay. At the bottom of page 572, it is said that a monad remains for the whole cycle of its incarnations in one manvantara under one star.
Yes.
Now, does the monad continue from one manvantara to another manvantara, or is it created totally anew at the start of each manvantara? Because I could read that statement as implying that we have a different star for each manvantara if the human monad progresses from one manvantara to another.
Okay, thank you for the question. So, to reread that sentence that's being asked about, it says the 7 sons of light are called stars. The star under which a human entity is born, says the occult teaching, will remain forever its star, throughout the whole cycle of its incarnations, in one Manvantara. So the question is, does that mean it's only for one Manvantara, and the next time the monad comes from another of the 7 rays, or does it continue? The answer is, I don't know. But maybe we can individually study more about it and contemplate it. Certainly, nothing is ever created completely anew. As unfathomable as it sounds, the secret doctrine says that evolution has always been ongoing. The universe is a cyclic manifestation, but it never had a first coming into being. Somehow from eternity the universe has been coming into being, going out of being, evolution proceeding on an ever ascending scale. There's no limit to perfection. So at the next Manvantara, wherever and whatever the monad comes from, it will be a continuation in some way of something from the previous universal life cycle. That's about all I know how to say for that one.
So the individual human monad may well proceed from one Manvantara to another.
It may do, but I don't know. Just take Chris's question before the next Skype ones.
Well, going back to David's question, I just wanted to quickly bring up semantics is a kind of so-called new science, where there is a definite correlation between a sound, a shape, and the colour.
Right.
So specific notes make specific geometrical shapes, usually forms of stars, 6-pointed stars, 8-pointed stars, 7, whatever. But there is a correlation between the two, recognised by science. That's what I wanted to say.
Oh, thank you. So science recognises relation between sounds and colours.
And shapes.
And shapes, yes. And hopefully numbers, or maybe it doesn't recognise that yet. Thank you. Were there some more Skype questions?
Yes. So Susanna's asking, what are the differences between the 7 rays? Are they related to the 7 principles? Perhaps the 7 principles sublimated?
Okay, well, in the Theosophical Glossary, in the entry for primordial light, which is on page 262 of the glossary, it says the 7 rays become later the 7 principles in nature. And so these 7 rays, seeing as they are, in effect, the manifested logos, as we saw in the layout on the front of the handout, all groups of 7 are related to them and have their origin and sustenance in these 7. So whether it be the 7 planes of the cosmos, the 7 principles of the human being, 7 root races, whatever the 7 is, it has its source and origin in the 7 rays. And there's another quote relating to that. And the Theosophical Glossary has entries for some of the names of the 7 rays. You may notice the Sanskrit names are at the bottom of page 1 of the handout. Sushumna, Harikesha, Vishvakarman, Vishvatriarkas, Sanada, Sarvavashu and Svaraj. Some of those can be looked up individually in the glossary. And in the glossary entry for Svaraj it says it is the last or 7th synthetical ray of the 7 rays, the same as Brahma. These 7 rays are the entire gamut, or the totality, of the 7 occult forces of nature. Each name stands for one of the creative gods, or forces, with a capital F. So hopefully that may help to answer that question. Yes?
Another question. So it's a very interesting talk, and it's very highly metaphysical in a way, and it's nice to look at these from yet another perspective, because we tend to approach it in different aspects, different ways. But what can we say about the importance of metaphysics in our daily lives? Because one could say, well, how is this going to help us, be happier, be better human beings? Or what can we answer to that?
I anticipated such a question, so I'll read this.
We didn't arrange that.
There was no collaboration. It's true, the talk was, and the subject is very metaphysical and theoretical. This is an excerpt from an article called The Test of Application in the Theosophical Movement magazine for November 1954, under the title Metaphysics and Ethics. It says, there is one difficulty which we must mention. There are students who do not like the metaphysical jargon, as they call the grand philosophical and even psychological principles of the esoteric philosophy. They desire to practice ethics. This is good, but they have to understand that metaphysical and philosophical principles are highly valued by the Master himself, who has said, outside of metaphysics, no occult philosophy, no esotericism is possible. On the other hand, there are those who have long ago read Light on the Path and the Voice of the Silence, the Bhagavad Gita and the Dhammapada, and have little use for these quote-unquote goody-goody sermons. They commit even a greater error than the former class. Both philosophical knowledge and right morality are necessary. The true devotee must learn the art of perceiving ethical truths in metaphysical propositions, and also the profundity enshrined in simple-looking moral principles. The mind is the great slayer of the real, says the Voice of the Silence, but it is also through the mind and its organ in the brain that the cosmos and its mysteries are to be fathomed. In our lower and tarnished consciousness lies buried the seed which can grow like the lotus plant out of scum. By right effort will bloom the flower whose heart alone is capable of drinking the light of the spiritual sun. And B.P. Wadia, in one of his letters, wrote, the practice of ethics without a study of metaphysics is not practicable. Why did H.P.B. write on cosmogenesis and anthropogenesis? Why did the Masters take the time and the trouble to give the teachings not only about the 7 principles, but also about rounds, races, etc.? The Voice of the Silence was the very last book she gave to us. How can anyone seek the inner ruler within without a proper and very careful study of, number 1, the 7 principles, number 2, their interrelationship, number 3, their macrocosmic source, and number 4, the divine ethics underlying this teaching? Study, application, promulgation are the 3 sides of an equilateral triangle. So hopefully that may go some way to answering the question. Not every single part of the theosophical teaching has an immediate, direct and obvious practical application in our daily lives. Many aspects do and are more specifically applicable to human living and to bringing about greater peace in human life, such as knowing about the law of karma, responsibility, duty, virtue, reincarnation, universal brotherhood, and so on. But even this, as a more metaphysical, theoretical teaching, does link in with all that, so we can see the correlations and then act practically and outwardly with a deeper knowledge behind it. So, is there something on Skype, or did you have a point?
Well, I was just going to follow up Will's question. So what you said, HPB told us we have to see ethical truths in metaphysical propositions.
Mm.
So when we study metaphysics, we need to be able to extract from that study ethical truths.
Yes, and vice versa.
Make applicable
Mm.
to our decision making in everyday life. Could you give some examples, for instance, of what from the metaphysics that we've covered about some ethical truths that you can extract?
I thought about it beforehand, as it's such a, relatively speaking, complex metaphysics. To me, the immediate apparent practical principle that comes forth from this is simply that which is the first main object of the Theosophical movement, universal brotherhood, the fact that all comes from one and the same source, everything is, in its essence, the one. We all presumably know that and accept that. What this does, for example, in the elucidation from the Secret Doctrine about the three logoi and so forth, is it explains more clearly how that is. Because it's all right to say we're all one, that's true. But many people, if you say that to them, may say that sounds nice, but how are we all one? It's a nice idea, but how is it? Theosophy says all is one because the one is all. This explains how the one becomes all through this progressive, what the ancients call the doctrine of emanations, and so forth. So for me, that's what comes to mind in response to that question. But Chris had a point.
Well, you ended with the quote, the Father in heaven. And doesn't HPB say something about that in the Key to Theosophy, the true power of prayer? Actually, if people knew how to pray to their Father in heaven, that's the esoteric meaning behind it. Perhaps maybe that's something.
Did you want to say a bit? It's called will prayer in the Key to Theosophy.
Would you like to elaborate?
Okay. Theosophy is against the practice of prayer as commonly understood, mainly for two reasons. One is, if we believe everything proceeds according to the law of karma, that the reaction to our previous actions, and that's truly a law, an immutable law, then we can't pray for something to change. Things will happen as effects of the causes we've set in motion, whether we like it or not. And the second is that, according to Theosophy, there is no God. The term God is rarely ever used in Theosophy. There is the Absolute that we've been talking about, but because it's an impersonal, infinite divine principle, it's not a being, it's not an entity. It doesn't and cannot hear a human being praying to it. So, the Key to Theosophy, which is maybe the best book by H.P. Blavatsky to begin with for those who are new to this study, says that instead of talking, we believe in acting. And the real type of prayer esoterically is called will prayer. It's acting with deliberate will and intent to act and live and function in unison and harmony with our true self, our higher nature, as much as possible with this so-called Father in the heavens, which is our divine prototype. And that goes back to living according to the parameters and with a deliberate end in view to our actions, the aim of helping and serving humanity, treading the bodhisattva path, and endeavouring to inspire others to do the same with all of our actions in daily life.
I just want to say something with regard to, can I speak?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I just want to say something with regard to why metaphysics is very important, in addition to what you mentioned about universal brotherhood. Because when we talk about universal brotherhood, I think a lot of people, as you say, don't understand it. But when we take a human being from whatever race, from whatever nation, from whatever level of intelligence, usually we will see that the way we operate, our deepest aspiration, our deepest hope, our very true nature, whether it's lower or higher, are always almost identical. And the fact that we, as the immortal being, we are on a journey, we are pilgrim on a journey, and this journey is common to all of us, regardless of the race and the nation or that we come from. We are all on this journey, whether consciously or unconsciously. And and when we put that together with the concept, the knowledge of karma and reincarnation, and we put it all makes sense at once. That truly, those things give us the rationale behind universal brotherhood and everything else that we've been talking about tonight.
Yes, thank you very much for your comment.
Yeah, I was asking regard to the logo. Basically, I said, does each logo have a specific role, responsibility, function in respect to the corresponding monadic evolution, and what analogy or correspondence is there to be established between the root races, the ground, and the planetary chain?
It might take about 2 hours to try to answer that. In your question, when you're talking about the logo, are you talking about these 7 Dhyani Buddhas?
Yes, since they are our immediate forefathers, as you mentioned.
Well, there is a relation, as you say. The secret doctrine says that each has its own specific purpose or function to fulfill in the workings of nature and the universe, which is guided from within, without, from these higher levels downwards to what we see and feel. You can read in the secret doctrine that each of the 7 root races that you mentioned, also each of the 7 globes of a chain, is under the protection and influence of one of the 7. It doesn't go as far as to say which of the 7, although it does say which of the sacred planets the 5 root races that have already happened are born under. But obviously we don't know which of the rays they necessarily correspond to. But it says, for example, that the 5th root race, which is the one currently now in active evolution, called the Aryan, as in the Indo-Caucasian, Indo-European, was born under the influence of Mercury, or Buddha in Sanskrit, and that the previous, the Atlantean, came about under the influence of Saturn and the Moon, and the Lemurian under the influence of Venus. But this is as far as it goes in what we have. Are there any more?
One last one. So Christina's asked about the continuation of the monad from one manvantara to another. Is it not said that those who enter nirvana without choosing the bodhisattva path will have some kind of penalty at some point after nirvana? We discussed this before the meeting, actually.
Yes, this was, well, basically exactly the same topic that came up in the 5 p.m. introductory meeting today. Yes, it said that those who choose to enter nirvana during a cycle of manifestation or during a manvantara are going against the principle of renunciation that is the bodhisattva ideal, and so they're entering into eternal bliss, being remerged into the absolute, whilst humanity remains